August 1831. The rolling hills of Southampton County, Virginia, are a backdrop for a bloody uprising. An enslaved preacher would lead the charge for his people's freedom in a massacre that left more than 50 dead. Next, a closer examination of Nat Turner's rebellion through the eyes of a direct descendant in this edition of History Through the Lens. Nat Turner's rebellion. We're going back to 1831 in the hills of Southampton County, an insurrection against white slave owners led by an enslaved black preacher. It is a watershed moment in American history, a very difficult topic for many people to talk about even today, centuries later. I'm here now with a direct descendant of Nat Turner, his great-great-great-grandson, Bruce, who grew up in Southampton County, and you live in Hampton Roads now, right?
Yes, I live in Virginia Beach today.
All right, you're from Virginia Beach.
Mm-hmm.
This is a pretty amazing story because it's only been until recent years that we've talked more about what happened with Nat Turner. I say recent decades and recent times in history. Can you just tell us about, let's go back to that time, 1831, and how this all came about. What was the inspiration for him to lead an insurrection against his owners and against the white slave-owning class in Southampton County?
Sure. A lot of people have a little misconception about Nat Turner. They think that he was only a preacher. He was actually, he was a slave. He was a farm worker, but he was also a carpenter. He also did metalworking. Preaching he felt was his true calling to his nature. As a child, he said in his confessions that he experienced or spoke about things which gave people the opinion that he was to be special. And that one of his grandmothers had made a little phrase about him that said that if he had too much sense to be raised, and if he would be of no use to anyone as a slave. And Nat said that kind of ruled him his whole life, that if he was smart enough not to be a slave, why should he be a slave? And so in the probably his middle teens, when he became a preacher or became a follower of the gospel, his owners were Methodists, and they made an effort to bring the Bible to their slaves. Whether it was good or bad, I don't know. But anyway, Nat had determined that slavery was wrong morally as well as legally and anything else. And so for years and years, he studied about ways how to change that. And that he felt that if it's to be changed, it would be a change coming through from him.
Now, there was a vision that he had, wasn't it?
He had many visions. He used to say that he had one. But
1820s?
Right. But one particular vision that he claimed that in 1825, May of 1825, he said that the heavens opened up and he heard a loud noise and that he saw black people, white people, locked in close combat, and that a voice told him that these were the things in which that he was to change, and that he was to be the person who would take on the yoke that Christ had borne for the sins of men to relieve those. And he said that the serpent would be set loose, and he should take on that yoke and relieve the burdens that the slaves had. He interpreted that as to say that means that he had to eliminate slave owners, and that the only way to end slavery was to end those who were enslaved, which means the people who own slaves.
Families, meaning, and that means women, children, along with the men.
Everybody who was a slave owner.
Right.
And so a baby who was 5 months old or 6 months old could be a slave owner. And an event happened in 1828. Nat's master, Tom Moore, died, or his owner. And Tom Moore's young son, named Putman Moore, who at that time was only about 6 or 7 years old, became Nat's new owner. He owned the farm, all the slaves, all the property, horses, cows, everything. So if Nat could be owned by a child, to him, in case of an insurrection, a child was no more than another target.
So he seemed, from what you're telling me, it wasn't an emotional decision to lead this uprising and righteous anger? More, was it a methodical, we have to do this to be free, period?
Yes. Matter of fact, in his confessions, Nat said he had absolutely no problems or no complaints about his master, Joseph Travis, at that time. Matter of fact, he said he was a good man.
Yeah, I'd seen that. Right.
Right. But the institution of slavery in itself was so aberrant that it had to be eliminated. And all across the country, don't forget, at that particular time, there were people who were preaching, they called them abolitionists, who were going around and trying to eliminate slavery through the legal method.
Sure.
They used to try to do compromises, and they tried to make laws, but those laws were always defeated or knocked down because slavery, as it was a very, very profitable institution. In Virginia, the reason Virginia was one of the main states at that time was because of slavery. The value of the slaves, when it was added up, turned most of the, probably I would say, the largest concentration of millionaires at that time were in Virginia, and they were slave owners.
And that's interesting because after, I know we're jumping ahead here a bit, but after the insurrection of 1831, there was a debate in the Virginia legislature about slavery. And here's somebody named Samuel McDowell Moore of Rockbridge County, and he spoke on behalf of abolition. And he, of course, pointed to the evil consequences of slavery on the enslavers. And he said, gradually wasting away their small patrimonial estates and raising their families in habits of idleness and extravagance. As a result, he claimed economically Virginia actually trailed other states because of the institution of slavery. And he also said that the large enslaved population might interfere with Virginia's ability to fend off foreign aggression, a little more of a practical means there by not having freed people. But that was an interesting other view that, wait a minute, it's actually holding us back as a society.
Yes, it was. And because don't forget, the Virginia was actually, you would say they were what you call land rich, cash poor. Most of the large plantations and slave owners, their values of their properties were mixed up into their land. I mean, they had estates like 3, 4, 5,000 acres and 3, 4, 500 slaves. So that was when you look at it in terms of monetary value, it would show on paper that they have a tremendous amount of assets. But in terms of actual cash money, they had very little of it. And so the easiest way that they could raise quick capital was to parlay their slaves, either sell them or loan them out or pass them down through wills and stuff like that. So yes, that was one of the economic reasoning for that particular statement. I remember reading about that years ago. And it was also one of the reasons why West Virginia today is a state, because that portion of what they call Western Virginia at that time, it was all part of Virginia. They were more like the poor area.
Right.
Because it was mountainous and it's not that conducive.
And they were abolitionists, right?
They were abolitionists, right. A lot of them. But the area itself physically was just not that conducive to having large states with large numbers of slaves working the land.
Right.
And so that eventually, one of the reasons when the Civil War happened 30 years later, that West Virginia was able to break away from Virginia and become a free state.
Very interesting. We're going to end our first segment right there. I'm talking to Bruce Turner, direct descendant, the great-great-great-grandson of Nat Turner, who led Turner's Rebellion in Southampton County back in 1831. We're back with more History Through the Lens after this. Welcome back. This is History Through the Lens. I'm Tom Schaad. Today we're going back to 1831, August of that year, and Nat Turner's Rebellion. Joining me, Bruce Turner, great-great-great-grandson of the enslaved preacher Nat Turner, who also had many other talents as well, kind of a Renaissance man. Take us back then to that evening in August of 1831. Tell us about the insurrection itself.
Okay. Well, as Nat was preparing, he had studied for almost 2.5, maybe 3 years.
Looking at a drawing now.
Right, of Nat. This is a true drawing of Nat Turner. He had determined that the only way that he could end slavery was through violence. And so he devised up a means where they would go from farm to farm, attack the white slave owners, free their slaves and draw an army as he went, and therefore draw his forces. He made sure that he only told 6 people his plan. Their names was Henry, Hawk, Nelson, Jack, Will, and Sam. They met at various places, but most of the time they were met at a place called Cabin Pine, which is not too far from where Nat lived at on the Moore farm. And on the night of August 21, some say that night, that was when they met and they had a feast. And then they made their final plan was that they would go to start off at Nat's home, which he was living in at that time. It's called the Joseph Travis house. And Nat would be the person to strike the first blow. So they left from that place at dark, somewhere between maybe 11 o'clock and 1 o'clock in the morning.
Wow.
And they entered the house. They killed 5 white people that was living there, which was Joseph Travis, who was the master of Nat, but the true owner, the real owner of Nat, was Putman Moore, the 9-year-old.
9-year-old, yeah.
Right. And here they, including a young baby, which Joseph and Sally Travis had a baby that was a year old. And they freed 3 or 4 more of the slaves that was there living in the farm that joined up with them. And then they went from there to the next place. They killed that master, got his slaves free, and they would move all up through this is going on in the dark.
Right.
In August, very hot. I did some research, and that night, the moon was in its what is called third quarter. So if it was a clear night, you weren't going to see too well, but you could see a little bit. But their whole goal was to go from farm to farm without being detected. And after they attacked, everywhere they would go, they would attack and kill the slave owner and then free some of the slaves. Some slaves would join them. Other slaves told them they would not. And a few slaves actually fought against them. And so by the time the sun had come up, they had covered nearly about 10 miles by that point, traveling through the woods, through the back roads.
Right.
And when the sun was up, they found people working out in the fields, and they started killing the white masters and slave owners the same way. Nat's overall goal was to reach the town of Jerusalem, which today we know it as Cortland. Right. He had reasons to believe that they had an armory there, and they kept arms there, which is what we today would call like the National Guard Armory. He was intending to get that and take on the town and build up a large enough force of freed slaves and using those weapons that it would force the white government to agree to end slavery. Unknown to Nat, that a few of his followers, or 1 or 2 of his followers, kind of like got tired of the killing, and they went and told some other white people, or went to warn some of their own owners. And so a militia of white slave owners that did manage to escape had started following them with their weapons. And the word had gotten out to, by that afternoon, had gotten out to Cortland, or Jerusalem, that the slaves were rebelling. And so a force of armed whites met him, and they ended up in a place called Parker's Field. They fought a battle. Nat basically won the battle, but he ran out of ammunition. And so he had to flee the field, but the whites also had to flee the field, in which that it was kind of like some say Nat won, some say it was a stalemate, some say it was lost. But anyway, he realized he could not get into Jerusalem on that direction because he had to cross a bridge there. There was a large river called the Nottoway River that separated the area. So he went to another location called Cypress Bridge, which was about 1.5 miles away. When he got there, the militia had also been able to get there ahead of him, and they had that portion of the bridge blocked off. So he could not get across that bridge, which means that now he was stuck with his forces over on just one side of the river from where he wanted to get to. The slaves who had joined him didn't really know where he was going. They were following him. And during that night, he decided what they call hunker down inside of a place called near Buckhorn Pond. And during that night, they had all kinds of little skirmishes and excursions and things like that. And the next morning, quite a few of his followers had deserted them. But he still had a large enough force to where they went to some more farms. They confronted some more militias. They fought some more battles. Eventually, they were just through the weight of numbers and the weight of
and the resources.
And the resources, they were all forced to break up. And then Nat went into hiding and stayed hidden for about 74 days before he was finally captured by Benjamin Phipps on October the 30th. And he was only just a couple of miles from where he originally started.
And it didn't take long between October 30th and November 11th for him to be tried and convicted.
I was surprised, really, when you look at it, considering during that time period, after the insurrection was broken up, Some say it was broken up by the 24th. Others say it was broken up by the 25th. But definitely by the 25th, whites had complete full control again. And then they went on a killing spree of their own. And the insurrection only talk about the 58 whites who were killed.
Right.
But there was maybe as many as 200 blacks were killed.
Without a trial, too.
Oh, they were just summarily shot down. There was one report of one particular a slave owner who captured one of his slave women who he felt that had threatened his wife, tied her to a tree, and then he and his friends emptied their guns into her, and so much so that the bullets killed the tree.
Oh, my. We talked about that in our story several years ago.
Yes. Right. And there was other cases where heads were cut off and put on spikes. There's a road that was down there was known Blackhead Road, to where that the heads from black slaves
were
cut off and were put up on pikes as a way to say the population that slavery was going here to stay. So there was horrendous atrocities that were committed by the whites. True, the black slaves did commit some atrocities and murders because they murdered people in their homes.
Sure.
They killed women and children. But the whites also killed women and children and murdered people everywhere.
All from the institution of slavery.
All from the institution of slavery. And oddly enough, the only way that the slaves could find safety was to actually stay on their plantations. They found safety under the coverage of their masters. Because back then, if someone killed a slave that they did not own, they had to pay the owner of that slave the money for killing them.
And we have a story of one of the slaves actually warning
his master
that they're coming.
And he was able to get away.
And right.
And that was also another one of the slaves who actually stood and fought beside their master at Dr. Blunt's house. That was where Nat confronted a few slaves who stood out on them and fired on them, and even captured a couple of his people.
This is fascinating. I know we got to take a break right now. We're going to come back with another segment, a fascinating story of the insurrection of 1831, Nat Turner in Southampton County. I'm talking to Bruce Turner, a direct descendant. We're back after this. Reliving Nat Turner's rebellion, 1831, through the hills of Southampton County. I'm Tom Schaad. This is History Through the Lens. And I'm joined by Bruce Turner, great-great-great-grandson of Nat Turner himself. And we talked about the massacre itself, the insurrection. We talked about the times in which Nat Turner lived, a very different time, of course, than we live today here in America. You want to talk a little more about his family, though, right?
Yes.
Before we go to the legacy, because there's some interesting stories you have about Nat's family.
Yes. Well, Nat's mother, as I say, her name
Your
was,
family, I should say.
My family, yeah. Nat's mother was named Nancy. She was the first person we do know that came from Africa. And she arrived here somewhere around about 1800 and was purchased by Benjamin Turner on February 1800, taken to Southampton County. Nat was born on October the 2nd, 1800. That's where he lived his whole life there until he was executed on November the 11th.
He was hanged.
Hanged.
Yeah.
Yeah. For the results of the insurrection.
Sure.
He wasn't the only one who was hanged for the insurrection. A total of 17 others were also hanged, including one woman. Her name was Venus. But anyway, Nat did have a family. He was married. His wife's name was Cherry. And together they had at least 4 children. Could be 5, but 4 of them that we do know. And the youngest was a daughter named Charlotte, who was born on May the 30th, 1830, a year before the insurrection. But the interesting thing is that Nat's children and his wife was owned by a man named Tom, what his name was, Gills Reese. And so consequently, they had the last name Reese, not Turner.
Okay.
Because slaves typically was identified by the last name of their owner.
Their owners, right.
Right. Charlotte survived the insurrection, and she had children. She had children up all the way up until probably the 1860s. Anyway, one of her daughters, a young lady named Fanny Turner, I have a picture of.
You got a picture of her there.
Yeah, that you can put up if you like. Fanny Turner was born in 1856, October 13th. She was the last member directly from Nat Turner and the family that was born as a slave. And Fanny lived to have 10 children.
Look like a very strong,
Very
determined
strong
woman.
This picture was taken of her in 1910.
Wow.
Yes. But anyway, out of the 10 children that she had, the third oldest was a son named Herbert Lawrence Turner Jr. or Herbert Lawrence Turner Sr. He was just known as Herbert Lawrence Turner at that time. And Herbert Lawrence Turner lived to have 6 children, of which the youngest was a son named Herbert Lawrence Turner Jr. That's where the junior comes in. And he was born on December the 9th, 1927.
Okay, we're getting there.
We're getting there, right?
We're getting there.
And Herbert Lawrence Turner Jr., in turn, had 4 children, of which his oldest son, the second oldest, was a son named Bruce Lawrence Turner. That's me.
I was waiting for that.
Yeah. And I now have 3 children and also 6 grandchildren. So the line is going to continue on. Out of my 6 grands, 5 of them are girls. So I'm expecting some great grands one of these days.
Well, let's talk a little bit about just our legacy in general, because I know you have a lot of good friends still in Southampton County, and it's because of the Nat Turner insurrection that you were able to reconnect with some people. And a lot of people really have a difficult time moving on from what happened in 1831 on both sides.
Yes, and that is true. I mean, the black people didn't like to admit that they were slaves, they're the descendants of slaves. In order to say that, well, okay, there was someone in my family who had connections with Nat Turner, you got to admit that that family member was a slave. As I say, Fanny Turner was a slave. She was born a slave. She got her freedom. Her mother was born a slave, and she also got her freedom. As far as we know, Charlotte died in 1903. Nat was a slave, born a slave, and for the most part died a slave, even though technically he had eliminated his slave status by killing his masters. But after he was hanged, the state of Virginia, or the Commonwealth of Virginia, paid $375 to Putnam Moore, to his relatives. Putnam was dead, but for Putnam Moore's relatives,
Compensation.
because it's compensation for the state having destroyed a valuable piece of property. Even though they executed them, they still had to pay for him.
Wow.
Because his body still represented property. As I said earlier, the economy of Virginia was tied up into the ownership of slaves. A person, regardless of their age or their size, they had value, and that value had to be compensated for. So down through the years, people on both sides, both black and white, have often wanted to kind of ignore the fact of how slavery was so intertwined and their lives were so intermixed.
Because it goes against the American ideal of what we're supposed to be and what we're always reaching to be.
That's correct. And Virginia, from the time of 1865, at the end of the Civil War, all the way up until the 1970s, 60s and 70s, where you had the Civil Rights Bill passed, was what you would call a Jim Crow state.
Yes.
Segregation was very well entrenched. And so blacks and whites didn't particularly mingle very much. And as I was growing up, we were always told that we were descended from Nat Turner, but we were supposed to keep it quiet because you didn't know how. We knew that there were white families around us who had lost members during the insurrection. Sure. And years ago, back in 2001, I met a young man, had a chance to meet a guy named Rick Francis, and his family was heavily affected by about Rick. 20 members in their family were killed.
Wow.
Well, Rick and I couldn't easily, we said that happened to someone else. And Rick and I today, we communicate, we talk. We don't have any feelings of animosities towards either one another.
Wow.
His family owned people. Yes, they did. He owns family. He owns property down there today. And, he was able to build his career, but you would say, well, on the profits of slavery. But I built my career as well. And,
yes, you did.
And now, so here I am.
Computer science.
I was in some computer science. And here I am now. I'm retired. But my children have all done well. They all went to college. My grandchildren are right now all attending college.
One last question then. What's that say about America in your eyes, in your view?
In my view is that America is a country where we get it right most of the time. But sometimes we don't get it right. And sometimes it can be horrific when we don't get it right. Slavery was one of those cases where they did not get it right.
From the beginning.
From the beginning.
Yeah.
Right. The delegation from Virginia, Thomas Jefferson and George Washington and all those, they were slave owners. James Madison. When you look at the American presidential, the first 16 presidents up to Abraham Lincoln, 9 of those were slave owners.
That's right.
and direct slave owners, and two of the others, even Abraham Lincoln's wife, Mary Todd, her family were slave
Right.
owners.
They were in Kentucky. Yeah.
So you could almost say that all 16 of the first 16 of American presidents in some way or another had a direct or an indirect connection with slavery.
And then we fought a civil war.
And we fought the Civil War.
And even then we had
presidents who were
continue fighting.
who had slaves. Ulysses S. Grant, we give as the winner of the Civil War. He owned a slave. He gave him his freedom, but he did own him.
Wow.
Robert E. Lee obviously owned slaves.
He owned slaves. Yeah.
And all the way up until Woodrow Wilson was the last U.S. president whose family had direct connections to slavery. The Wilson's family used to own slaves. Since Woodrow Wilson, and he was president number 22, I think it was 22 or 23.
We're going to have you back. We're running out of time. This has been such a great conversation.
Okay, but to wrap it up,
give me your final thought.
the Turner family today, we recognize that Nat Turner was a significant part of our history, and that solidifies our reason to why we have the right to be here as much as everybody else. I always impress upon my grandchildren, and hopefully one of these days my great-grands, that we have a rich legacy, and it's something to be proud of. We may not necessarily be proud of the end results of deaths, but we're proud of the fact that Nat stood up and tried to make a change. It happened 30 years later, but could say, in a way, he fired the first shot for the Civil War. And that eventually that horrible institution that America definitely got wrong was eventually gotten rid of. And it took another 100 years almost. So many of my family members participated in the civil rights movement and the voters' rights movement to where we got it now to where it is close to being right. It's not fully right. We still got some of that lingering feelings. Some people will have strong opinions about this podcast.
I know they will on both sides. And you know what? That's perfectly fine.
Perfectly fine.
That's why we're here.
Yeah. But overall, the country is better and is a better place because of people like Nat Turner and what he did. Even though it may have been painful, it may have been horrific, had he not acted what he did at that time, who knows how the Civil War may not have come out until later or much.
We don't know.
No, right.
We don't know. That's how history works.
But we do know that what he did. He did it for the reasons why he did it, and that the country was better for it overall in the end.
That's your final thought. Thank you. Bruce Turner, great-grandson of Nat Turner, who led Nat Turner's rebellion in 1831. This has been History Through the Lens.